On November 14th, 1969, something impossible happened on the Moon. The Apollo 12 crew had just finished their lunar surface operations and were preparing to leave. Before departing, they did something that would change our understanding of Earth's closest neighbor forever. They deliberately crashed their lunar module into the Moon's surface to test seismic equipment left behind by the astronauts. What happened next defied everything scientists thought they knew about planetary bodies. The Moon rang like a bell, not for a few seconds or even a few minutes. The reverberations continued for over 3 hours. The seismic signal was so clear, so prolonged, and so unlike anything ever recorded on Earth, that NASA scientists sat in stunned silence as the data came through. Maurice Ewing, a co-director of the seismic experiment, famously said the Moon reacted like a gong, continuing to vibrate long after being struck. On Earth, when you create similar seismic events, the vibrations dampen quickly because our planet is solid and dense. The energy dissipates through layers of rock, metal, and molten core. But the Moon? The Moon behaved like a hollow sphere. This was not supposed to happen. This was not in any textbook. This was not predicted by any model of planetary formation. But here is where it gets even stranger. The Apollo 12 impact was not an isolated incident. On May 13th, 1972, a meteorite struck the Moon's surface with tremendous force. The seismic instruments, still faithfully recording from multiple Apollo landing sites, picked up the impact. The Moon rang again. This time, the reverberations lasted for over 4 hours. 4 hours of continuous vibration from a single impact. The seismic waves traveled across the lunar surface with minimal dampening, suggesting that beneath the outer shell of rock and dust, something was fundamentally different about the Moon's internal structure. NASA's own data showed something that should not exist. The seismic waves moved through the Moon in a way that suggested either massive internal cavities or a structure so different from Earth that comparison became meaningless. Dr. Gordon MacDonald, a NASA scientist, examined this data and made a statement that still echoes through conspiracy circles today. He said that based on the seismic evidence, it seemed the Moon might be hollow, not partially hollow, not containing large caves, but hollow in a way that suggested an artificial structure. Now, before we go further, let us look at the density problem, because this is where hard science meets unexplainable mystery. Earth has a density of 5.52 grams per cubic centimeter. This makes sense because our planet has a massive iron core surrounded by layers of increasingly lighter material. The Moon's density is only 3.34 grams per cubic centimeter. It is far too light for its size. If the Moon formed from the same material as Earth, or if it was created by a chunk of Earth being knocked off by a massive impact as mainstream science claims, then the densities should be similar. They are not. The Moon is missing its core, or it has a core so small that it makes no geological sense. Think about that for a moment. Our Moon, a body large enough to affect ocean tides on Earth, large enough to stabilize our planet's rotation, large enough to be visible in the sky as a massive disk, weighs far less than it should. Where did the mass go? What is inside? In 1970, 2 Soviet scientists, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov, published a paper in the Soviet magazine Sputnik that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. These were not fringe researchers or conspiracy theorists. These were members of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. Their paper was titled, "Is the Moon the Creation of Alien Intelligence?" In it, they laid out a detailed hypothesis based on the available data. They proposed that the Moon was not a natural celestial body, but an artificial construct, a planetoid that had been hollowed out billions of years ago using advanced technology. They suggested it was placed in orbit around Earth deliberately. The paper examined every anomaly known at the time: the low density, the strange seismic data, the Moon's perfectly circular orbit, which is extremely rare for captured satellites, the fact that the Moon always shows the same face to Earth, a phenomenon called tidal locking that usually takes billions of years to occur naturally but seems too perfect in the Moon's case. Vasin and Sherbakov calculated that if you wanted to create a stable artificial satellite capable of surviving billions of years in space, capable of protecting something inside from cosmic radiation and meteor impacts, you would build exactly what we see when we look at the moon. A thick outer shell of rock and metal, 30 to 40 kilometers deep, protecting a hollow interior. The scientific community dismissed their paper as speculation, but here is the problem. Nobody could actually refute their calculations. Nobody could explain the seismic data in a way that made complete sense. The giant impact hypothesis, which claims the moon formed when a Mars-sized object called Theia collided with Earth 4.5 billion years ago, still cannot explain why the moon is so light, why it rang like a bell, or why its orbit is so mathematically perfect. And then there are the elements that should not exist on the moon at all. When the Apollo missions brought back lunar soil samples, scientists discovered something alarming. The moon's surface contains processed metals, not trace amounts, not microscopic particles. Significant concentrations of brass, mica, titanium, and uranium-236. That last one is particularly troubling. Uranium-236 is a radioactive element that does not occur naturally. It is only created as a byproduct of nuclear fission. It only exists when uranium has been processed, when it has been used in nuclear reactions or weapons. Why is it on the moon? The titanium concentrations in the Sea of Tranquility are 10 times higher than anywhere on Earth. Titanium is what we use today to build spacecraft, because it is incredibly strong and heat-resistant. The moon's surface is rich in the exact materials you would need to construct a vessel capable of surviving in the harsh environment of space. Some of the moon rocks brought back by Apollo astronauts have been dated to 5.3 billion years old. Earth itself is only 4.5 billion years old. How can the moon be older than the planet it orbits? The standard explanation is that these rocks formed elsewhere and were somehow captured by the moon's gravity. But that explanation requires accepting a series of coincidences so unlikely that they strain credibility. We need to talk about what NASA found but rarely discusses. During multiple Apollo missions, instruments detected unusual magnetic fields on the moon's surface. The moon has no global magnetic field like Earth does, which makes sense if it has little to no iron core. But there are localized areas where the magnetic readings spike dramatically. These magnetic anomalies appear in patterns. Some form straight lines, stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Others create geometric shapes visible from orbit. Natural geological processes do not create straight lines or perfect geometric patterns. Intelligence does. Hey, if you are finding this information as mind-blowing as I did when I first discovered it, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. We are just getting started on this journey, and trust me, what is coming in the next sections will challenge everything you thought you knew about our solar system. Tap that notification bell too, because YouTube does not always show my videos to everyone, and you are not going to want to miss what we have uncovered about ancient texts that describe the moon's arrival. Seriously, the evidence we're about to explore gets even more compelling. Alright, let us keep going. Ground-penetrating radar sent from Earth and from lunar orbit has revealed massive voids beneath the moon's surface. We are not talking about small caves. We are talking about empty spaces large enough to contain entire cities. Some of these voids appear to be connected by tunnel-like structures that run for dozens of kilometers. In 2016, NASA confirmed the existence of enormous lava tubes on the moon, some of them 50 kilometers long and several kilometers wide. They publicly stated these could be used for future lunar bases because they would provide natural protection from radiation and temperature extremes. But here is the question nobody at NASA wants to answer. Lava tubes form from flowing magma. The moon has been geologically dead for billions of years. These structures are pristine, geometrically regular, and show no signs of collapse despite their massive size. How? The data keeps piling up. The anomalies keep multiplying, and every single one of them points in the same direction. The moon is not what we have been told it is. The hollow moon theory is not based on grainy photographs or eyewitness testimony. It is based on seismic data collected by instruments placed on the lunar surface by NASA astronauts. It is based on density calculations that any physics student can verify. It is based on soil samples that contain impossible elements. This is not fringe science. This is data that mainstream astronomy cannot adequately explain. So if the moon is hollow, or partially hollow, or contains massive artificial structures inside, then the next question becomes unavoidable. Who built it? When? And most importantly, why? There is a moment that happens roughly every 18 months that should not be possible. The moon passes directly between Earth and the sun, and something magical occurs. A total solar eclipse. The moon covers the sun so perfectly that only the sun's corona remains visible, creating one of the most beautiful phenomena in nature. But here is what most people do not realize. This perfect alignment is mathematically absurd. The sun is 400 times larger than the moon. Exactly 400 times. And by sheer coincidence, the sun is also exactly 400 times farther away from Earth than the moon. This means that from our perspective on Earth, the sun and moon appear to be the exact same size in the sky. The probability of this happening naturally is so small that astronomers cannot even calculate it with confidence. In the entire solar system, Earth is the only planet where perfect total solar eclipses occur. Every other moon is either too small, too large, too close, or too far away to create this phenomenon. Some scientists call it a cosmic coincidence, but when you start adding up all the coincidences surrounding the moon, you begin to realize that coincidence might not be the right word. Intentional design starts to look like a better explanation. Let us talk about the moon's orbit, because it breaks multiple rules of celestial mechanics. The moon orbits Earth in an almost perfect circle. Most natural satellites have elliptical orbits, sometimes wildly elliptical. They swing close to their planet and then far away in elongated loops. This is what gravity naturally produces when one body captures another. But the moon? Its orbit is so circular that it appears artificially stabilized. The eccentricity of the moon's orbit is only 0.0549. To put that in perspective, it is more circular than most satellites we have launched into space with precise calculations and rocket adjustments. And then there is the tidal locking situation. The moon always shows us the same face. Always. For the entire history of human civilization, we have only seen one side of the moon. The far side remained a complete mystery until the Soviet Union sent a probe around it in 1959. Tidal locking happens when a moon's rotation period matches its orbital period exactly. This can occur naturally, but it usually takes billions of years and requires very specific conditions. Only about 2% of moons in our solar system are tidally locked. The odds are not in favor of it happening. Yet our moon locked itself to Earth so perfectly that not even 1 degree of the far side peaks around the edge. But here is where it gets suspicious. Computer models show that for the moon to become tidally locked naturally, it would need to have started much closer to Earth and gradually moved away over billions of years. The models work mathematically, except for one problem. If the moon was that close to Earth in the past, the tidal forces would have been catastrophic. Ocean tides would have been hundreds of feet high. The Earth's rotation would have been dramatically different. Days would have been only 6 hours long. There is no geological or fossil evidence supporting these conditions during the time when life was developing on Earth. The timeline does not match. Something is wrong with the official explanation. Ancient civilizations knew things about the moon that they should not have known. The Babylonians, over 2,000 years ago, could predict eclipses with stunning accuracy. They discovered the Saros cycle, a period of 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours after which eclipses repeat in almost identical patterns. How did they figure this out without telescopes, without computers, without even accurate clocks? They would have needed to observe and record eclipses for thousands of years to discover this pattern. And they did. Somehow, they did. The Mayan civilization also tracked lunar cycles with impossible precision. Their calendars account for the moon's orbit so accurately that their calculations differ from our modern measurements by only seconds per year. They built entire cities aligned to moonrise and moonset positions. They scheduled religious ceremonies around lunar events decades in advance. The mathematical knowledge required to do this rivals what we have today. We are supposed to believe they figured this out by just watching the sky casually, with no instruments, no scientific method as we know it. Here is something even stranger. Greek historians, including Aristotle and Plutarch, wrote about people called the Proselines. The word literally means before the moon. These were supposedly people who lived in Arcadia, a region of Greece, before the moon existed in the sky. Multiple ancient sources reference a time when the moon was not visible from Earth. Roman authors repeated these claims. The writings describe these pre-moon people as ancient, even by Greek standards, suggesting their civilization existed over 10,000 years ago. Now, mainstream historians dismiss these accounts as mythology. But what if they are historical memory passed down through generations? What if there was a time, in the distant past, when the moon was not in Earth's orbit? What if it arrived? The moon is currently moving away from Earth at a rate of 3.8 centimeters per year. We know this because NASA has been measuring it since 1969, using laser reflectors placed on the lunar surface by Apollo astronauts. Scientists bounce lasers off these reflectors and measure how long the light takes to return. The data is undeniable. The moon is leaving us, very slowly, but measurably. If you run the math backward, you can calculate where the moon was in the past. 10,000 years ago, it was 380 meters closer. 100,000 years ago, 3.8 kilometers closer. But if you go back far enough, say a few billion years using the current recession rate, the moon would have been so close to Earth that it would have been inside the Roche limit. That is the distance at which tidal forces tear a celestial body apart. The moon would have disintegrated. It could not have formed where standard theories say it formed. Scientists explain this by saying the recession rate was different in the past. The moon moved away faster at first, and then slowed down. Maybe. Or maybe the moon has not been in Earth's orbit for as long as we think it has. There is another orbital mystery that nobody talks about. The plane of the moon's orbit is tilted 5.14 degrees relative to Earth's equator. This tilt is why we do not get solar and lunar eclipses every month. But here is the thing. If the moon formed from Earth after a giant impact, as the Theia hypothesis suggests, the moon should orbit along Earth's equatorial plane. The impact would have created a debris disk around Earth's equator, and the moon would have formed from that disk in an equatorial orbit. But it did not. The 5-degree tilt suggests the moon came from somewhere else, that it was placed into orbit rather than forming naturally from Earth's material. Ancient Sanskrit texts from India describe celestial mechanics in ways that sound impossibly advanced. The Surya Siddhanta, written at least 1500 years ago, calculates the diameter of the moon as 2,065 miles. The actual diameter is 2,159 miles. They were off by less than 1% without telescopes. The text also describes the moon's orbit, its distance from Earth, and the mathematical relationships between lunar and solar movements with precision that European astronomers did not achieve until the 1700s. How did they know? Who taught them? The moon stabilizes Earth's axial tilt at 23.5 degrees. Without the moon, Earth's axis would wobble chaotically over thousands of years. Sometimes we would tilt 60 degrees toward the sun, creating extreme seasons that would make most of the planet uninhabitable. Sometimes we would barely tilt at all, eliminating seasons entirely. The moon's gravitational influence keeps us stable, keeps our climate predictable, keeps life possible. Mars does not have a large moon, and its axial tilt varies between 10 and 60 degrees over geological time. Mars is dead. Earth is alive. The difference? The moon. Is that another coincidence? A moon just happens to be the exact right size, the exact right distance, and the exact right mass to stabilize Earth's rotation and create perfect eclipses and control ocean tides and provide light during the night. How many coincidences do we accept before we start asking different questions? The moon's presence allowed life to develop on Earth in stable conditions over billions of years. Without it, complex life might never have evolved. We might not exist. So if the moon is artificial, if it was placed here deliberately, then whoever put it here might have done so specifically to allow life to flourish on Earth. We might be living on a planet that was terraformed, stabilized, and protected by an ancient intelligence that wanted us to exist. That thought should terrify and amaze you in equal measure. Before we move on, I am curious. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop your location and the time in the comments. I want to see how far across the globe this information is reaching, and whether you are staying up late or starting your day with questions about the moon. It is fascinating to me that people from every time zone are searching for these same answers. Alright, let us keep digging because what we are about to explore gets even stranger. When Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon's surface on July 20th, 1969, he was walking on something that should not exist. The fine grey powder beneath his boots, the rocks scattered across the landscape, the dark plains stretching to the horizon, all of it was wrong. Not wrong in a subtle way that only specialists would notice. Wrong in a way that fundamentally contradicts what we understand about how planetary bodies form and evolve. The Apollo astronauts collected 382 kilograms of lunar material across 6 missions. These samples have been studied in laboratories around the world for over 50 years. And the more scientists examine them, the stranger they become. The moon's surface contains materials that have no business being there, elements that require specific conditions to form, conditions that a dead, airless rock floating in space simply cannot provide. Start with titanium, the sea of tranquility, where Apollo 11 landed, has soil with titanium concentrations reaching 10 times higher than the richest titanium deposits on Earth. Titanium does not concentrate naturally in such abundance. On Earth, we mine it from specific mineral deposits that formed through complex geological processes involving water, heat, and pressure over millions of years. The moon has never had liquid water. It has been geologically inactive for billions of years. So where did all this titanium come from? And why is it so heavily concentrated in specific areas like the Maria, those dark patches visible from Earth? We use titanium today specifically because it is perfect for aerospace engineering. It is incredibly strong, lightweight, and resistant to extreme temperatures. It does not corrode. It can withstand the harsh environment of space better than almost any other metal. If you were building a massive structure designed to survive in space for billions of years, titanium would be your first choice for the outer hull. The moon's surface is essentially wrapped in the exact material you would use to build a spacecraft. Then there are the radioactive elements, uranium-236 and neptunium-237. Let me be very clear about what these are. They are not natural. They do not form through any known geological process. Uranium-236 is a synthetic isotope created only in nuclear reactors or during nuclear weapons testing. It is a byproduct of nuclear fission. Finding it on the moon is like finding a plastic bottle on a beach and being told it formed naturally from sand and water. It did not. Someone made it, someone brought it there, or someone created it there through nuclear processes. NASA's official position is that these elements might have been created by cosmic ray bombardment over billions of years. Might have been. Possibly. Perhaps. These are not the words of scientists who are confident in their explanations. These are the words of people trying to fit impossible data into acceptable theories. The Maria, those dark plains visible from Earth, present another paradox. They are vast basaltic plains that supposedly formed from ancient lava flows billions of years ago, but the distribution makes no sense. 99% of the Maria are on the near side of the moon, the side facing Earth. The far side, which we never see, has almost no Maria at all. It is covered in craters and highlands. Why would volcanic activity be concentrated on only one hemisphere? Volcanic processes do not care which side of a moon faces a planet. Magma rises wherever pressure and heat allow it. Yet the moon's volcanic history is bizarrely one-sided, as if something deliberately resurfaced the near side while leaving the far side untouched. And speaking of craters, let us discuss how shallow they are. The moon has been bombarded by meteorites for billions of years. Some of these impacts were absolutely massive, creating craters hundreds of kilometers across. When you calculate the energy required to create craters that large, the impacts should have punched deep into the lunar surface, perhaps 50 or 60 kilometers down, but they did not. Almost every crater on the moon, regardless of size, is remarkably shallow. It is as if the meteorites hit something hard just a few kilometers below the surface and could not penetrate deeper. A metallic shell, perhaps. A constructed barrier between the surface and whatever lies beneath. During the Apollo missions, astronauts drilled into the lunar surface to collect core samples. They rarely could drill deeper than 3 meters before hitting what they described as extremely hard material that their equipment could not penetrate. The drill bits, designed to cut through rock, would stop as if they had hit metal. Mission reports describe this resistant layer, but never adequately explain what it is or why it is there. Just hard material. Impenetrable material. Exactly what you would expect if the moon's outer crust is relatively thin and covers something much more solid underneath. There are also the glass beads. Millions upon millions of tiny glass spheres scattered across the lunar surface. Glass forms when rock melts at extremely high temperatures and then cools rapidly. On Earth, this happens during volcanic eruptions or when lightning strikes sand. But the moon's glass beads are different. They are perfectly spherical, uniformly distributed, and exist in quantities that volcanic activity alone cannot explain. Some researchers have suggested they formed during meteor impacts, when the heat of collision melted surface material. But the sheer volume and uniform distribution suggests something else. Intense, widespread heat applied to the lunar surface. Heat that melted the outer layer uniformly, perhaps during construction, perhaps as a protective coating. Then there is the mystery of CREEP. Scientists love their acronyms. CREEP stands for potassium, rare earth elements, and phosphorus. It is a type of lunar rock that contains unusually high concentrations of these elements, along with uranium and thorium. CREEP is highly radioactive and is found primarily in the Oceanus Procellarum region on the near side. The concentrations are so high that some areas are essentially nuclear hotspots. Why would these elements concentrate in specific locations? Natural geological processes distribute elements more randomly. But if you were building a structure that required nuclear power, you might create fuel deposits in specific areas for easy access. Magnetic striping is another surface feature that defies easy explanation. Using sensitive instruments, scientists have mapped the moon's magnetic field and found linear patterns of magnetism stretching for hundreds of kilometers. These stripes are parallel, evenly spaced, and geometrically precise. On Earth, magnetic striping occurs at mid-ocean ridges, where tectonic plates spread apart and new crust forms, recording reversals in Earth's magnetic field over millions of years. But the moon has no tectonic activity. It has no global magnetic field that could reverse. Yet the striping exists, looking for all the world like it was artificially created, like circuitry embedded beneath the surface. High-resolution photographs from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter have revealed features that NASA quietly catalogues but rarely discusses publicly. Straight lines that extend for dozens of kilometers, right-angle formations where natural erosion should have smoothed everything into curves, hexagonal crater patterns where randomness should dominate. There is even a crater near the lunar south pole called Shackleton that has a floor so perfectly flat it looks machine-leveled. Natural impacts do not create flat floors. They create central peaks, rough terrain, scattered debris. Shackleton's floor is smooth and level like a landing pad. The lunar regolith, that fine dust covering everything, is also peculiar. It is incredibly abrasive, sharper than any sand on Earth. It clung to spacesuits, jammed equipment, and caused problems for every Apollo mission. This dust formed from billions of years of micrometeorite impacts pulverizing surface rock with no atmosphere to slow them down. But chemical analysis shows the dust contains metallic particles that are not oxidized, not weathered, and suspiciously uniform in composition. It is almost as if the outer layer of the moon is slowly being ground down, revealing processed materials underneath. Some of the lunar rocks returned by Apollo contain pure iron, not iron oxide or iron combined with other elements, but pure metallic iron. Iron rusts almost immediately when exposed to oxygen or water. Pure iron does not survive long in natural environments. It corrodes, combines with other elements, and disappears into compounds. Finding pure iron on the moon is like finding a stainless steel knife buried in ancient ruins. It should not be pristine. It should be transformed by time. Unless it was protected, unless it was manufactured. Every sample, every photograph, every measurement adds another piece to a puzzle that does not fit the picture we have been given. The moon's surface is not the result of 4.5 billion years of natural geological processes. It looks like a construction site that has been abandoned for eons, slowly accumulating damage and debris, but never quite hiding what it originally was. A built structure, an engineered surface, an outer shell protecting something far more important underneath. And if the surface is this strange, this impossible, this clearly artificial, what does that say about what lies beneath? There is a clay tablet sitting in the British Museum that should not exist. It is called the Planisphere, and it comes from the ancient library of Nineveh in what is now Iraq. The tablet dates back to around 700 BC, but the astronomical observations recorded on it are far older, possibly from 3000 BC or earlier. This single piece of baked clay contains calculations of celestial movements so precise that modern astronomers needed computers to verify them. The Sumerians, working with nothing but naked eyes and primitive tools, somehow mapped the night sky with accuracy that would not be matched again until the invention of the telescope over 4,000 years later. But here is what keeps researchers awake at night. The tablet does not just show the moon's position, it shows knowledge of the moon's orbital precession, the 18.6-year cycle of how the moon's orbit tilts and shifts relative to Earth's equator. To discover this cycle, you would need to observe and record the moon's position every single night for decades. Compare those observations to previous generations' records, and then calculate patterns spanning centuries. The Sumerians did this, somehow, and they wrote it down in cuneiform script on clay tablets, preserving astronomical knowledge that modern science did not rediscover until the 1600s. Why were they so obsessed with the moon? Every ancient civilization tracked lunar cycles with religious devotion. The Babylonians, Egyptians, Chinese, Maya, and countless others built massive stone structures aligned to moonrise positions. They scheduled their entire societies around lunar calendars. They worshipped moon deities with a fervor that seems excessive for what should be just another object in the sky, unless they knew something we have forgotten. The Zulu people of southern Africa have an oral tradition that has been passed down for thousands of years. Their creation myths describe the moon as the egg of creation, brought here by the ancient ones in a time before memory. They say the moon arrived in the sky as a hollow sphere, placed there deliberately to watch over humanity. The Zulu word for moon, Inyanga, also means the watcher, or the one who observes. This is not metaphorical language added later by storytellers. This is embedded in the linguistic roots of their culture, suggesting the association is ancient, perhaps older than the Zulu people themselves. Travel halfway around the world to West Africa, and you encounter the Dogon tribe of Mali. These people, living in remote villages with no modern technology, possessed astronomical knowledge that baffled anthropologists when it was first documented in the 1930s. The Dogon knew about Saturn's rings before telescopes reached Africa. They knew Jupiter had moons. Most incredibly, they had detailed knowledge of Sirius B, a white dwarf star completely invisible to the naked eye, orbiting the bright star Sirius. They knew its orbital period of 50 years. They knew it was incredibly dense. They even drew diagrams showing its elliptical orbit. Western astronomers only confirmed the existence of Sirius B in 1962 using advanced telescopes. When anthropologists asked Dogon priests where this knowledge came from, they always gave the same answer: the Nomos, beings who came from the sky in ancient times and taught humanity about the stars. The Nomos specifically taught them about the moon, describing it as an artificial structure placed in the sky by an older civilization. The Dogon were told this thousands of years ago, and they have preserved the story with ritual precision ever since. Now we turn to India, to the ancient Sanskrit texts that predate written history in most of the world. The Vedas, some of the oldest religious texts known to humanity, contain passages that describe flying machines called vimanas. These are not vague poetic descriptions of chariots flying through clouds. These texts include technical specifications, measurements, instructions for construction and operation. The Vaimanika Shastra describes different types of vimanas, their power sources, and their capabilities. Some could fly through air, others could travel through space. And according to these texts, the moon was a station, a base used by the gods during their travels between worlds. The Surya Siddhanta, another ancient Indian text, calculates the moon's diameter as 2,065 miles. Modern measurements put it at 2,159 miles. They were off by less than 1% without any optical instruments. The text also states that the moon is inhabited by beings who do not require physical bodies, who exist in a state between matter and energy. Western readers dismiss this as mythology, but what if it is an ancient attempt to describe something real? Advanced beings existing in a form we do not understand, inhabiting a structure we mistakenly believe is a natural satellite. The Hindu concept of time is staggering in its scope. They speak of yugas, vast ages lasting hundreds of thousands or millions of years. They describe cycles of creation and destruction that repeat endlessly, and within these cycles, they place the moon's arrival. According to Vedic chronology, the moon has not always been in the sky. It arrived during a previous age, placed there by the devas, divine beings, with technology indistinguishable from magic. Is this mythology, or is it ancestral memory of an actual event, distorted by time but preserving the essential truth? Greek philosophy preserved fragments of knowledge that mainstream historians find uncomfortable. Aristotle, in his work on the heavens, references earlier writers who spoke of the Arcadians, a people who claimed their ancestors lived before the moon appeared in the sky. Apollonius of Rhodes wrote about the Proserpines, the pre-lunar people. Plutarch discussed this in his writings, treating it not as fantasy but as a legitimate historical mystery worth investigating. These were serious scholars, and they took these accounts seriously because the evidence was still accessible to them. Ancient records, now lost, that documented a time when Earth had no moon. Roman author Ovid wrote in Metamorphoses about a time when the heavens were different, when the night sky was darker because the moon had not yet been placed among the stars. He describes it arriving during a cataclysmic period, an age of fire and flood that reshaped the world. Modern readers assume he was being poetic, but Ovid was also a scholar who had access to archives and traditions that no longer exist. What if he was reporting what the ancient records actually said? The Book of Enoch, excluded from most versions of the Bible but preserved by Ethiopian Christianity, describes the Watchers in disturbing detail. These were celestial beings who descended to Earth and taught humanity forbidden knowledge. They taught astronomy, the movement of the stars, the secrets of the moon. The text specifically states that the Watchers showed humans how to observe celestial signs and understand lunar cycles. Why would heavenly beings need to teach humans about the moon, unless there was something about the moon that was not obvious? Unless the moon was part of their infrastructure, their technology, and understanding it required instruction? Enoch himself is taken on a journey through the heavens, shown the mechanisms by which the sun and moon move. The descriptions sound mechanical, not natural. Gates through which celestial bodies pass, chambers where light is stored, operators who control the movements of heavenly objects. If you read these passages without religious bias, they sound like someone describing a sophisticated system of artificial satellites and space stations, using the only vocabulary available to an ancient observer. Chinese astronomical records go back over 3,000 years in unbroken succession. The Chinese were meticulous record keepers, documenting every eclipse, every unusual celestial event, every change in the sky. Their historical texts contain references to a period they call the time of chaos, before the current dynasties, when the sky was ordered and the moon was set in its course. The language suggests deliberate placement, not natural formation. They describe astronomical knowledge being given to humanity by divine emperors who came from the stars. These emperors, according to legend, ruled for impossibly long periods and possessed knowledge beyond human capability. The Maya built an entire civilization around astronomical observation. Their calendars tracked not just the sun but Venus, Mars, and especially the moon, with obsessive precision. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Mayan books, contains lunar tables predicting eclipses hundreds of years in advance. The mathematical sophistication required to create these tables rivals modern astronomy. Yet the Maya did this without telescopes, without calculators, without any of the tools we consider essential for such work. Their priests could tell you exactly when the moon would darken, when it would align with the sun, when it would reach specific positions relative to Earth. How? Mayan legend speaks of the builders, ancient beings who came before humanity and created the infrastructure of the cosmos. They placed the lights in the sky, organized the movements of celestial bodies, and ensured that time itself would flow in predictable cycles. The moon, in their cosmology, was a gift from these builders, a tool to mark time and guide humanity through the darkness. Is this mythology, or is it their best attempt to explain what their ancestors witnessed? Indigenous peoples across North America share similar stories. The Hopi speak of sky people who came down in flying shields and taught the ancestors about the stars. The Lakota describe star nations, civilizations in the heavens who interact with Earth. Almost universally, these traditions describe the moon as a construct, a vehicle, or a dwelling place of powerful beings. The consistency across continents and cultures is striking. These are not derivative stories borrowed from one another. These are independent traditions separated by oceans and millennia, all describing the same basic reality. The moon is not natural. It was made. It was placed. And those who made it once walked among us. What did our ancestors know that we have forgotten? What did they see that we explain away as primitive superstition? Maybe the ancient texts are not mythology at all. Maybe they are history. And maybe we have been reading them wrong this entire time, dismissing truth as fantasy because the truth is too disturbing to accept. If the moon is artificial, then someone built it. That simple statement opens a door to possibilities so vast and unsettling that most people reflexively slam it shut. Because once you accept that premise, everything changes. Human history becomes a footnote in a much longer story. Our achievements become less impressive when compared to what came before. And the question stops being whether advanced civilizations existed in the ancient past. The question becomes how many, how advanced, and what happened to them. Let us start with the timeline because that is where the conventional story begins to fall apart. Mainstream archaeology tells us civilization started around 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. Before that, humans were hunter-gatherers, barely surviving, living in small tribes with no written language and no significant technology. This narrative held firm for over a century. Then, in 1994, a shepherd in Turkey stumbled across stones jutting from the ground. What archaeologists uncovered at Göbekli Tepe shattered every assumption about human prehistory. Göbekli Tepe is 11,600 years old. To put that in perspective, it was already ancient when the Egyptians built the pyramids. The site contains massive T-shaped pillars, weighing up to 20 tons each, covered in intricate carvings of animals and symbols. These pillars were quarried, transported, shaped, erected, and decorated by people we are told had not yet invented agriculture or permanent settlements. The site shows evidence of planning and coordination that requires a complex society with surplus food, specialized labor, and architectural knowledge. Yet according to the official timeline, none of that existed yet. Göbekli Tepe should not be there, but it is. And it forces us to ask what else we have missed. The structure contains astronomical alignments. The pillars track specific stars and constellations, particularly Sirius and Orion's belt. But there is something else. Some researchers believe certain configurations track lunar cycles in ways that suggest knowledge of the moon's orbital mechanics. If true, this means people 11,000 years ago understood celestial mechanics well enough to encode them in stone monuments. Either our ancestors were far more sophisticated than we believe, or they were taught by someone who already possessed that knowledge. Now we need to talk about the Younger Dryas event. Around 12,800 years ago, Earth experienced a sudden and catastrophic climate shift. Temperatures plummeted, ice sheets advanced, megafauna went extinct, entire ecosystems collapsed. For over 1,000 years, the planet was locked in a mini ice age that should have taken millennia to develop, but happened in decades. Recent evidence suggests this was triggered by multiple comet or asteroid impacts across North America and possibly other continents. The impacts would have caused massive fires, ejected debris into the atmosphere, and triggered climate chaos. Here is where it gets interesting. If an advanced civilization existed before the Younger Dryas, this event would have been an extinction-level catastrophe for them. Cities destroyed, infrastructure obliterated, populations decimated. The survivors would have been thrown back to survival mode, forced to rebuild from scratch with limited resources and fragmented knowledge. Is it possible that humanity was advanced before 12,800 years ago and the younger Dryas reset everything? That what we call the birth of civilization 6,000 years ago was actually a reawakening, a slow recovery of lost knowledge? The genetic evidence is disturbing. Around 70,000 years ago, the human population crashed to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. We almost went extinct. This is called a genetic bottleneck, and it is written into our DNA. Every human alive today descends from that tiny surviving group. What caused the bottleneck? The standard explanation is the eruption of Mount Toba in Indonesia, which triggered a volcanic winter. But some researchers propose an alternative: war. Not tribal conflict over hunting grounds. War with advanced weapons that devastated populations on a scale we associate with nuclear conflict. If a previous iteration of human civilization destroyed itself in a technological war, the genetic bottleneck would look exactly like what we see. Then there are the anomalies, objects and structures that do not fit the timeline. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a Roman shipwreck, is a bronze device containing over 30 gears that calculated astronomical positions and predicted eclipses. It dates to around 100 BC and represents a level of mechanical sophistication that would not appear again in Europe until the 1400s. Who built it? Where did the knowledge come from? The device is not primitive, it is refined, suggesting a long tradition of mechanical engineering that somehow left no other trace. The Piri-Reis map from 1513 shows Antarctica's coastline as it appeared before it was covered by ice. That coastline has been buried under miles of ice for at least 6,000 years, possibly longer. Admiral Piri-Reis wrote on the map that he compiled it from older maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great or earlier. Who mapped Antarctica before the ice? Who had the capability to conduct surveys of an entire continent and the knowledge to create accurate cartographic projections? Baalbek in Lebanon contains the largest work stones ever used in construction. The trilithon stones weigh over 800 tons each. Modern cranes struggle to lift that much weight. Yet these stones were quarried, moved up a hill, and placed with such precision that you cannot fit a razor blade between them. Roman historians recorded that Baalbek was built on foundations from a much earlier time, from before the flood, as they described it. The Romans did not know who built the foundation. They only knew it was impossibly ancient and impossibly advanced. Consider the possibility that Earth has been home to multiple advanced civilizations, separated by cataclysms that wiped the slate clean. Each civilization rose, developed technology, perhaps even achieved spaceflight, and then vanished. Their cities eroded, their materials recycled by geology. Their descendants forgot what came before and started over. We might be the third or fourth or 10th iteration of human advancement, and each time, the few who survived carried fragments of the old knowledge forward, hiding it in myths and symbols, waiting for a generation wise enough to understand. But what if the builders were not human at all? The ancient texts describe the Watchers, the Anunnaki, the Nomos, and dozens of other names for beings who came from the sky and interacted with early humanity. They are described as taller than humans, more powerful, longer lived. They possessed technology that seemed magical. They taught astronomy, mathematics, metallurgy, agriculture, and architecture. Then, according to most traditions, they left, or they went into hiding, or they were destroyed in conflicts with each other. If extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings built the moon, the question becomes why? Why would anyone build an artificial satellite the size of a planet and place it in orbit around Earth? The most obvious answer is survival. If your civilization faced extinction from a dying star, a cosmic catastrophe, or a war that consumed your home world, you would need an ark, not a small ship. A massive vessel capable of preserving thousands or millions of individuals, along with their knowledge, their genetic material, and their culture. You would need life support systems that could function for millennia. You would need protection from radiation and meteor impacts. You would need a stable orbit around a planet where your descendants could eventually resettle. The moon is the perfect size for such an ark, large enough to house entire populations inside, massive enough to be gravitationally stable for billions of years, close enough to Earth to monitor conditions and intervene if necessary. And hollow construction makes perfect engineering sense. Why waste resources filling the interior with useless rock when you could create habitable space? You would build a shell strong enough to protect the interior and light enough to be moved using available technology. You would coat the exterior with materials that could withstand billions of years of meteor bombardment. You would make it look natural, so that primitive observers would not realize what it really was. Maybe the builders were us, an ancient human civilization that saw the Younger Dryas coming, or some other catastrophe, and had enough warning to launch an escape plan. They built the moon as a generation ship, hollowed it out, loaded it with survivors and technology, and fled into space. Perhaps they waited in orbit for thousands of years until Earth recovered. Perhaps they forgot their origins over generations and believed themselves to be from another star system when they finally returned. Perhaps we are their descendants, and the moon is our ancestral home, not Earth. Or maybe it was collaboration. Human survivors working with extraterrestrial refugees, combining technologies and knowledge to build something neither could have created alone. The moon as a joint project, a shared sanctuary for multiple species fleeing their own apocalypses. That would explain why ancient texts describe both human-like and non-human beings working together in the distant past. It would explain why the knowledge seems to have been given to humanity rather than developed naturally. Whoever built it, whenever they built it, the moon represents engineering on a scale we cannot currently match. Moving a planetary body into precise orbit requires energy expenditure beyond anything we can produce. Hollowing out thousands of cubic kilometers of interior space requires mining technology we do not possess. Creating a structure that can survive for billions of years requires materials science we are only beginning to understand. The builders, human or otherwise, were capable of things we still classify as impossible. And if they could build the moon, what else did they build? Are there other structures in our solar system? Other moons that are not what they seem? Is Earth itself a construct? A terraformed world prepared specifically for habitation? The implications spiral outward, endlessly once you accept that intelligence shaped our cosmic environment rather than chance. The builders left us a mystery wrapped in stone and metal, hanging in the sky where we cannot ignore it. Every night it rises, a monument to capabilities we have lost or never fully developed. And somewhere, encoded in its structure or hidden in its interior, might be the answer to who we really are and where we actually came from. Richard Hoagland held the photograph in his hands and felt his blood run cold. It was 1996, and he was examining images from the Apollo missions that had been quietly released by NASA decades after the lunar landings. This particular photograph, catalogue number AS10324822, showed something that should have remained hidden. Rising from the lunar surface, clear as day, was a geometric structure. Not a rock formation, not a trick of light and shadow. A tower, a spire jutting upward at least 1.5 kilometers high. Impossibly thin, impossibly vertical, impossibly wrong. Hoagland was a former NASA consultant, someone who understood orbital mechanics and photographic analysis. He knew what camera artifacts looked like. He knew how lighting could create illusions. This was not that. He enhanced the image, adjusted contrast, examined it from every angle. The structure remained. Other researchers began analyzing the same photograph. Some called it the shard. The consensus among those willing to look objectively was unavoidable. Something built that tower, and NASA had known about it since 1969. But the shard was only the beginning. Once researchers started systematically examining lunar photographs with fresh eyes, ignoring the official narrative about what should and should not be there, structures began appearing everywhere. The castle, photographed during Apollo 10, hovers above the surface in the crater Copernicus. The image shows a massive object suspended approximately 14 kilometers above the lunar surface, geometric in shape, with what appear to be supports or pylons extending downward. The object casts a shadow on the crater floor below. Objects do not hover naturally. They fall, unless they are held up by something, or unless they are part of a much larger structure buried beneath the surface, with only the top portion visible. NASA's explanation? Photographic anomaly, camera glitch, dust on the lens. But the same structure appears in multiple photographs, taken from different angles during different passes over the crater. It is consistent, it is real, and it is enormous. Estimates put the castle at over 9 kilometers tall if you include the underground portion suggested by ground-penetrating radar data. In 2007, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency launched the Selene lunar orbiter, nicknamed Kaguya. The mission included ground-penetrating radar capable of seeing beneath the lunar surface. What it found should have been front-page news worldwide. Massive cavities, tubes, voids, running for dozens of kilometers beneath the surface, some of them large enough to contain entire cities. NASA confirmed similar findings with their Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. The official explanation was that these are lava tubes, natural tunnels formed by flowing magma billions of years ago. Except they are too perfect, too straight, too geometrically regular. Lava tubes on Earth twist and turn, following the path of least resistance through rock. They collapse frequently. They are rough and irregular. The lunar tubes are different. They run in straight lines. They maintain consistent diameter for incredible distances. They show no signs of collapse, despite some being over 50 kilometers long and 5 kilometers wide. One tunnel discovered beneath the Marius Hills region is so large that you could fit downtown Philadelphia inside it. The structure remains stable despite having no internal supports visible in the radar data. How? Dr. Junichi Haruyama, the senior researcher on the Selene mission, stated publicly that these structures are perfect for establishing a lunar base because they provide natural radiation shielding. But in private communications, later leaked, he expressed concern about the geometric precision of these features. One email describes a tunnel system near the Sea of Serenity as looking artificial, like it had been bored through the rock using advanced machinery. The email was quickly dismissed as his personal speculation, not official findings, but the data speaks for itself. Then there are the domes. Scattered across the lunar surface, particularly in the regions NASA photographed extensively, are what appear to be domed structures partially buried or eroded. Some are transparent or translucent, visible only in certain lighting conditions. George Leonard's book, Somebody Else is on the Moon, from 1977 compiled dozens of photographs showing these structures. Leonard claimed NASA knew about them, that mission planners deliberately avoided landing sites near obvious artificial features to prevent astronauts from encountering anything that would raise uncomfortable questions. The Sinus Medii region contains what researchers call the bridge. Captured in Lunar Orbiter photograph LOIII-84M, this structure spans a crater like an actual bridge, casting shadows on both sides. It is approximately 3 kilometers long and appears to be supported by pylons on either end. Natural rock bridges exist on Earth, carved by erosion over millions of years, but they form horizontally, following geological layers. This structure spans a crater vertically, defying the geological processes that could have created it, and the moon has no erosion. No water, no wind, nothing to carve rock into bridge-like shapes over time. During Apollo 11's approach to the lunar surface, Neil Armstrong radioed an unusual message back to Houston. There was something on the rim of a crater they were passing. Something bright, something reflective. The conversation was picked up by amateur radio operators and later partially transcribed. Armstrong described seeing structures, possibly towers, reflecting sunlight. Houston's response instructed him to switch to a secure channel. The public transmission ended. What Armstrong saw, what he reported on the secure frequency, remains classified to this day. Buzz Aldrin, in multiple interviews years after Apollo 11, has hinted at things they saw but were instructed not to discuss. In a 2005 interview with Science Channel, he described a monolith on Phobos, Mars's moon, that looked artificial. When pressed about whether they saw anything unusual on the moon itself, he became evasive, stating only that there were many unusual things, and that people should visit the moon themselves and make up their own minds. His phrasing was careful, deliberate, the words of someone bound by non-disclosure agreements, but trying to communicate truth within those constraints. Apollo 10's crew reported hearing strange music while passing over the far side of the moon. The sound came through their radio systems despite being out of contact with Earth and having no other known source for radio transmissions. The recording was classified for over 40 years before being released in 2016. NASA's explanation was interference between the radios on the command module and lunar module, but the astronauts themselves stated the sounds were unlike any interference they had ever heard. Whistling, warbling, almost musical, coming from somewhere on the lunar surface below them. The Apollo 14 mission photographed something that has never been adequately explained. In the Fra Mauro Highlands, where the mission landed, orbital photographs show a perfectly circular formation, approximately 2 kilometers in diameter. The circle is too precise to be natural. Inside the circle are what appear to be geometric structures arranged in a grid pattern. When astronauts Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell were on the surface, Mission Control directed them away from the anomalous area, claiming the terrain was too difficult for safe exploration. Mitchell, who later became a vocal advocate for UFO disclosure, stated in interviews that he believed extraterrestrial intelligence had visited Earth and the Moon. He never explicitly confirmed what he saw during Apollo 14, but his conviction was clearly based on personal experience, not speculation. Chinese lunar missions have been remarkably secretive about their findings. In 2013, the Chang'e 3 lander and U2 rover explored the Mare Imbrium region. Official releases showed standard lunar surface images, but leaked photographs from personnel working on the mission analysis showed something else. Objects in the distance that appeared artificial, reflective surfaces, angular shapes inconsistent with natural rock formations. The Chinese Space Agency quickly scrubbed these images from internal servers and issued stern warnings about unauthorized disclosures. Western intelligence agencies noted the incident but said nothing publicly. Whatever the Chinese found, it was significant enough to classify immediately and completely. India's Chandrayaan missions have also encountered anomalies. Ground-penetrating radar data from Chandrayaan-1 revealed subsurface voids that correspond suspiciously with surface features long suspected of being artificial. The data was published in scientific journals but without commentary on the implications, just dry measurements and coordinates. No speculation about what might occupy those voids, or why they exist in patterns rather than randomly distributed throughout the subsurface. There is a crater on the far side of the Moon called Paracelsus C. Inside this crater, multiple researchers have identified what appears to be a facility or complex of structures. The images show linear features, right angles, and symmetric arrangements. Most striking is what looks like an entrance or opening, a dark rectangular area on the inner slope of the crater wall. The opening appears large enough to accommodate vehicles or spacecraft. Shadows cast by the crater rim allow estimation of depth, suggesting the opening extends at least several hundred meters into the hillside. Natural caves do not form rectangular entrances. Intelligence does. Near the lunar South Pole, in permanently shadowed regions where sunlight never reaches, orbital imaging has detected unusual heat signatures. These areas should be among the coldest places in the solar system, approaching absolute zero, yet infrared sensors detect warmth. Not much, just a few degrees above ambient, but enough to suggest an internal heat source. Radioactive decay? Perhaps. Or operational technology generating waste heat, venting into space at minimal but detectable levels. If you are enjoying this deep dive into what is really happening on the Moon, make sure you are subscribed, because what we are about to explore next will connect all these discoveries to ancient prophecies and modern space programs. Hit that bell icon too. These videos sometimes get suppressed by the algorithm, and I need you to catch every update. We are building something here together, uncovering truths that have been buried for too long. Alright, back to these structures. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, operating since 2009, has mapped the Moon's surface in unprecedented detail. The resolution is high enough to see individual boulders, the tracks left by the Apollo rovers, even the descent stages of the lunar modules still sitting where they were abandoned. With this kind of resolution, you would expect NASA to have catalogued every interesting feature by now. But there are gaps, regions where high-resolution imagery is not publicly available, areas where the data exists but has not been released. And when researchers file Freedom of Information Act requests for images of specific coordinates where anomalies have been reported, those requests are often denied on national security grounds. National security. For photographs of the moon's surface. What could possibly be up there that constitutes a national security concern unless it is something that challenges the official narrative about what the moon is and whether we are alone? The evidence is overwhelming. The moon is not just a hollow sphere with an artificial outer shell. It contains infrastructure, tunnels, chambers, possibly entire cities buried beneath the regolith, protected from radiation and meteor impacts, waiting, dormant, abandoned, or occupied by something that has been watching us for far longer than we have been watching it. Imagine you are an engineer tasked with saving your civilization. A catastrophe is coming. Maybe your sun is dying. Maybe a cosmic event will sterilize your planet. Maybe your species has destroyed its own world through war or environmental collapse. You have the technology to escape, but you need more than a ship. You need a lifeboat that can function for thousands, maybe millions of years. You need something that can protect populations, preserve knowledge, and eventually provide a new home. What would you build? You would not build a conventional spacecraft. Metal hulls corrode, mechanical systems fail, fuel runs out, electronics degrade from cosmic radiation. A traditional ship, no matter how advanced, has a limited operational lifespan. If your journey spans millennia, if you cannot predict when or where you will find a suitable planet, you need something far more durable. You need something that looks like it belongs in space, something that will not attract attention from other civilizations you might encounter. You need something that can generate its own gravity, recycle its own resources, and repair itself using raw materials from asteroids or planetary rings. You would build a hollow moon. The physics actually works. A sphere is the most efficient shape for containing volume while minimizing surface area. This means maximum interior space with minimum construction material. The outer shell provides radiation shielding. Make it 30 to 40 kilometers thick, composed of rock, metal, and processed materials, and you have protection, equivalent to Earth's atmosphere and magnetosphere combined. Nothing from outside gets through. Cosmic rays, solar flares, micrometeorite impacts, all absorbed by the shell. Inside, you have a protected environment where life can survive indefinitely. Gravity is the tricky part, but there are solutions. If the interior of the moon is hollow, or mostly hollow, you could create artificial gravity through rotation. Not the entire moon, just habitable sections within. Rotating cylinders or rings inside the shell, large enough to house cities. Spinning at precisely calculated speeds to generate Earth-normal gravity through centrifugal force. This is not science fiction. This is the O'Neill cylinder concept, proposed by physicist Gerard O'Neill in 1974 as a serious design for space habitats. Except O'Neill was designing small stations. Scale that concept up to lunar dimensions, and you have a generation ship capable of transporting millions. But why would you need millions? Because genetic diversity requires it. If you are preserving a species for an indefinite journey, you need a large enough population to avoid inbreeding and genetic bottlenecks. Biologists estimate that a minimum viable population for long-term human survival is around 500 individuals, but that assumes perfect genetic management. Realistically, you would want tens of thousands at minimum, preferably hundreds of thousands or millions, to ensure cultural diversity, skill sets, and resilience against disease or disaster. The moon's volume, if hollow, could easily accommodate that population. Conservative estimates suggest the interior could contain between 50 million and 300 million cubic kilometers of habitable space, depending on shell thickness and internal structure. That is more than enough for vast cities, agricultural zones, industrial areas, and nature preserves. You could recreate entire ecosystems inside. Forests, lakes, even simulated weather patterns using climate control technology. The inhabitants would not feel like they were living in a spaceship. They would feel like they were on a world. Life support becomes manageable at this scale. You need water, but comets and asteroids contain abundant ice. During the journey, the Ark could harvest resources from passing objects, replenishing supplies. You need oxygen, but plants produce oxygen. Massive interior biospheres filled with vegetation would recycle carbon dioxide, purify water, and provide food. The system becomes self-sustaining, a closed-loop ecosystem, requiring only external energy input, and energy is abundant in space. Solar collectors on the exterior shell, nuclear reactors using thorium or uranium deposits, possibly fusion reactors if the builders had that technology. The moon's demonstrated radioactive hotspots could be fuel reserves, deliberately placed for long-term power generation. Temperature regulation is actually easier in space than on a planet. Earth's atmosphere traps heat, creating complex weather systems. The moon has no atmosphere. The shell radiates excess heat directly into space while insulating the interior. Active thermal management systems, using the temperature differential between sunlit and shadowed regions, could maintain comfortable conditions indefinitely. The engineering is complex but not impossible. We understand the principles. We simply lack the industrial capacity to build at this scale. Now consider the strategic advantages of disguising your Ark as a natural satellite. If hostile civilizations exist, they might target obvious megastructures. A generation ship that looks like a conventional vessel advertises its presence and purpose. But a moon? Moons are common. Every surveying civilization would scan it, determine it is a natural body, and move on. The perfect camouflage. You could park your Ark in orbit around a habitable planet, wait for conditions to become suitable, and observe the surface while remaining undetected for millennia. This explains the moon's placement around Earth. If Earth was recovering from a cataclysm, or if it was being terraformed and prepared for habitation, the Ark could remain in orbit, monitoring progress. The inhabitants would watch as Earth's atmosphere stabilized, as life spread across the continents, as conditions became suitable for settlement, and when the time came, they could descend. Not all at once, gradually, small groups establishing outposts, testing the environment, eventually integrating with or becoming the dominant species. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. What if we are not native to Earth? What if humanity's ancestors came from the moon? That would explain the genetic bottleneck 70,000 years ago. A limited founder population descending from the Ark, spreading across Earth, and slowly losing memory of their origins over countless generations. It would explain why every ancient culture has myths about sky people, about gods descending from the heavens. It would explain our instinctive drive to explore space, to build, to reach beyond our planet. We are not reaching for the unknown. We are reaching for home. We are trying to return to the place we came from, even though we have forgotten we came from there. The Ark hypothesis also explains why the moon is gradually moving away from Earth. If it has active propulsion systems, even minimal thrust applied over millennia could alter its orbit. Maybe the departure is intentional. The mission complete, resources depleted, the Ark is slowly leaving, heading back into deep space or toward another destination. Or maybe the systems are failing, orbital corrections no longer functioning properly, and the moon is drifting away uncontrolled. There is a modern parallel that makes this hypothesis feel less fantastical. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway stores seeds from crops worldwide, preserved in an underground facility designed to survive any disaster. It is humanity's backup plan, a genetic archive ensuring that agriculture can be restored after nuclear war, climate collapse, or asteroid impact. We built this because we understand the fragility of civilization and the necessity of preservation. Now imagine a civilization far more advanced, facing extinction on a cosmic scale. They would not just preserve seeds, they would preserve everything. DNA samples from every species, digital archives of all accumulated knowledge, cultural artifacts, technology, perhaps even frozen embryos or genetic material from individuals deemed essential for rebuilding. The moon could be exactly that, not just a transport vessel but a vault, a cosmic library containing the genetic and intellectual heritage of one or more civilizations. The hollow interior might contain archives beyond our comprehension, databases holding billions of years of history, museums preserving artifacts from worlds that no longer exist, genetic repositories storing DNA from millions of extinct species, all protected, all waiting for someone to access them. And maybe that someone is us. Maybe humanity is slowly redeveloping the technology needed to return to the moon, not to explore it for the first time, but to reclaim it, to open the vaults, to remember who we were before we forgot. NASA's sudden renewed interest in lunar missions, the Artemis program promising permanent bases, China and Russia announcing lunar ambitions. Is this competition for resources? Or is it a race to reach the moon's interior first, to discover what is waiting inside before rival nations claim it? The Ark hypothesis is not wild speculation. It is engineering logic applied to astronomical anomalies. Everything about the moon, its composition, its orbit, its internal structure, its surface features, makes more sense as an artificial construct than as a natural satellite. And if we accept that, if we seriously consider that the moon is a built object with a specific purpose, then we must also accept that whoever built it might still be there. Dormant systems could reactivate. Artificial intelligences could be maintaining the infrastructure, waiting for the right conditions or the right signal to wake up. Or biological inhabitants could be in suspended animation, preserved for the journey, ready to emerge when their sensors indicate the mission can continue. We circle the moon with satellites. We plan to build bases on its surface. We talk about mining it for resources, but we have not asked permission. We have not considered that we might be trespassing on the most significant archaeological site in human history, or that the owners might not appreciate our presence. The Book of Enoch was removed from the biblical canon centuries ago. Church authorities decided it was too strange, too detailed, too disturbing to include alongside Genesis and Exodus, but the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved it, maintaining that Enoch's testimony was legitimate scripture, not apocryphal fantasy. And when you read it without theological bias, when you approach it as a historical document rather than religious allegory, something remarkable emerges. Enoch is describing a surveillance operation. Chapter 6 begins with a simple statement: 200 watchers descended to Mount Hermon. These were not ethereal spirits or metaphorical angels. Enoch describes them with physical precision. They had bodies. They ate food. They took human wives and produced offspring. They established a base of operations on a specific mountain, and from there began observing and interacting with early humanity. The word used for watchers in the original text is Grigori, which literally translates as those who watch or those who are awake. Not those who judge, not those who worship, those who watch. What were they watching from? The text never explicitly says, but there are hints. Enoch is taken on a journey to the heavens, shown the paths of the stars, the storehouses of the wind, the mechanisms controlling the sun and moon. He describes the moon as having chambers, places where light is kept and released according to precise schedules. He sees operators, beings who control these celestial mechanisms. This does not sound like metaphor. This sounds like someone describing technology using the only vocabulary available to a person living thousands of years ago. If the moon is an observation platform, everything about the Watcher's story makes perfect sense. An advanced civilization in lunar orbit needs intelligence about the planet below. You cannot govern or guide a developing species without understanding them. So you send observers, 200 individuals descending to establish a ground station to live among the humans, to assess their development and report back. The number 200 is specific and appears repeatedly throughout the text. That is not a mythological number. That is a deployment roster. But something went wrong. The Watchers did not just observe. They interfered. They taught forbidden knowledge. Azazel taught humans metallurgy and weapon making. Shemiaza taught enchantments and root cutting, possibly chemistry and pharmacology. Barakel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the constellations, literally the signs of the zodiac. Tamiel taught astronomy, the movements of celestial bodies. This was not casual interaction. This was systematic technology transfer, knowledge that humanity was not supposed to have yet, knowledge that accelerated human development in ways that violated whatever protocols the Watchers were supposed to follow. The text describes the consequences. The Watchers' offspring, the Nephilim, grew to enormous size and strength. They consumed everything, then began consuming humans. Violence spread across the earth. the world became corrupt, and from the heavens, from the place where the other watchers remained, came judgment. The mission was terminated. The rogue operators were imprisoned. A great flood was sent to cleanse the earth of what the intervention had created. Only Noah and his family, genetically pure, untainted by Nephilim DNA, were preserved to restart humanity properly. Now connect this to the moon. If lunar inhabitants were monitoring Earth, they would need ground agents eventually. Observation from orbit has limits. You cannot assess culture, language, or social structures from space. You need anthropologists on the ground. The Watchers served that function. But like any intelligence operation, there is always the risk of agents going native, becoming too attached to the population they are studying, sharing classified information, interfering in ways that compromise the mission. The location of Mount Hermon is significant. It sits at the borders of modern Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, at coordinates 33 degrees north latitude. Mount Hermon is exactly on the 33rd parallel, the same latitude as many other ancient sites with mysterious origins. Coincidence? Or was this location chosen for specific reasons, perhaps because it aligned with orbital patterns or communication requirements? The mountain is over 9,000 feet high, making it ideal for line-of-sight communication with orbital stations or for launching and receiving craft. Ancient Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki in similar terms: beings from the sky who came to Earth to mine resources, specifically gold. They created humans as a labor force through genetic engineering, mixing their DNA with proto-humans already present on Earth. The texts describe these beings as living in the heavens but descending regularly to oversee operations. They traveled in flying boats, in vehicles that roared and produced fire. They were not immortal but lived for thousands of years, and they watched. They observed everything humans did, recording it, reporting it back to their superiors. The Sumerian king list records rulers who reigned for impossibly long periods. Some kings ruled for 30,000 years or more. Mainstream historians dismiss these as exaggerated or symbolic. But what if the numbers are accurate and the kings were not human? What if they were watchers or Anunnaki, long-lived beings installed as rulers to manage human populations, their extended lifespans appearing godlike to humans who lived only decades? The connection to the moon becomes explicit in certain texts. The Sumerians describe the moon god Sin as dwelling in a celestial palace, a place of wisdom and judgment. Sin was not just associated with the moon. He lived there. His temple in was designed to reflect the lunar palace, a physical structure mirroring what existed above. The priesthood of Sin claimed to receive messages from the moon, instructions and prophecies transmitted from the palace above to the temple below. Communication, surveillance, command and control. Hindu mythology describes the moon as the home of the Pitris, ancestral spirits who watch over humanity and judge the dead. But earlier Vedic texts are less metaphorical. They describe the moon as a realm where advanced beings reside, beings who possess technology and knowledge far beyond human capability. These beings monitor Earth, occasionally intervening in human affairs when necessary. The moon is described as a checkpoint, a way station where souls are evaluated before being allowed to proceed to higher realms, or being sent back to Earth for reincarnation. Evaluation, processing. The language of bureaucracy and administration, not mysticism. Chinese mythology contains similar themes. The Moon Palace of Chang is not just a story about a woman who drank an elixir of immortality. Older versions describe Chang'e as fleeing to the moon, to escape punishment for stealing knowledge that was meant to remain hidden. She lives in the palace with the jade rabbit, who eternally prepares the elixir of life. Why would immortality drugs be manufactured on the moon, unless the moon was a facility, a laboratory, a place where such substances were actually produced and distributed to those deemed worthy? Indigenous North American traditions speak of sky lodges, structures in the heavens where the star people dwell. These beings descend occasionally in flying objects, observe human activities, and sometimes take individuals up to the sky lodges to teach them or to study them. The abduction phenomenon described in modern UFO encounters mirrors these ancient stories almost exactly. People taken aboard craft, subjected to medical examinations, shown visions of the future or the past, then returned with instructions or warnings. Surveillance, data collection. The methodology of researchers studying a subject population. The moon's role in ancient religion is universal and obsessive. Every culture tracked lunar phases with fanatical precision. They scheduled planting, harvesting, religious ceremonies, and even conception around lunar cycles. Why? If the moon is just a lifeless rock reflecting sunlight, why does it occupy such a central place in human consciousness? Unless somewhere deep in our collective memory, we remember that the moon is more than it appears. We remember being watched. We remember that those who watch from above care about lunar cycles because those cycles relate to their operational schedules, their communication windows, their surveillance patterns. The 28-day lunar cycle matches the average human menstrual cycle with suspicious precision. Women's fertility is synchronized to the moon. Births increase during full moons. Emergency rooms report higher admissions during lunar peaks. Skeptics call this coincidence or confirmation bias. But what if there is an actual mechanism? What if the moon emits signals, fields, or radiation that affects biological processes on Earth? Not dramatically, not obviously, but subtly, over generations, influencing reproduction rates, behavior patterns, even consciousness itself. If you wanted to manage a developing civilization from orbit, you would need to influence them without revealing yourself. You would need soft control, broadcasting frequencies that affect mood and decision-making, timing communications to lunar phases so your agents on the ground know when to expect instructions, monitoring population movements and conflicts using sensors that track heat signatures, electromagnetic emissions, and large gatherings. The moon, positioned perfectly above Earth, provides ideal geometry for such operations. Geostationary satellites work on the same principle: constant coverage, persistent observation. The watchers were not mythological, they were personnel. The moon is not a goddess or a symbol, it is a base. And if that base is still operational, if systems remain active even in dormancy, then we are still being watched. Every rocket we launch, every satellite we deploy, every transmission we broadcast into space is being recorded and analyzed by intelligence that has been studying us since before we built cities or wrote language. The question is not whether they are watching. The question is what they are waiting for. What threshold must we cross before they respond? What line must we avoid crossing, or what achievement must we reach before the watchers reveal themselves again and the moon shows us what it really is? December 1972. Apollo 17 splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, and humanity's journey to the moon officially ended. Eugene Cernan was the last person to walk on the lunar surface. He would remain the last for over 50 years, and counting. NASA promised we would return. Moon bases by 1980. Permanent settlements by 2000. Mining operations, tourist destinations. None of it happened. Instead, we stopped going entirely. The most expensive, most successful space program in history was cancelled at the peak of its capability. Why? The official explanation is budget constraints. The Apollo program was expensive, costing over $25 billion in 1970s money, equivalent to over $150 billion today. Congress wanted funding redirected to domestic programs. Public interest had waned after the first landing. The justification sounds reasonable, until you examine what actually happened to NASA's budget. It did not disappear. It was redirected to other programs. The Space Shuttle, the International Space Station, Mars probes. Plenty of money for those projects, just not for returning to the moon. But there is a darker explanation whispered in aerospace circles, hinted at in declassified documents, and suggested by the behavior of those who were actually there. We were told to stay away, not by Congress, not by budget committees, by something we found on the moon itself. Neil Armstrong became a recluse after Apollo 11. He taught briefly at the University of Cincinnati but avoided public appearances. He refused interviews. He would not discuss details of the mission beyond official transcripts. When pressed about why he became so withdrawn, people close to him said he was deeply troubled by something that happened during the landing. Armstrong died in 2012, taking whatever he knew to his grave, but others from the Apollo program have been less silent. Buzz Aldrin has made cryptic statements over the years. In a 2005 interview, he mentioned seeing something following Apollo 11 during the journey to the moon, an object pacing them, matching their velocity, maintaining distance. When asked what he thought it was, Aldrin said there were many things they saw that they were told not to discuss publicly. He has also spoken about a monolith on Phobos, calling it proof that we are not alone in the universe. Why would someone who walked on the moon be so certain about extraterrestrial structures unless he had seen similar things firsthand? Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut, was the most forthcoming before his death in 2016. He stated categorically that extraterrestrials exist, that they have visited Earth, and that governments know about it. He claimed to have been briefed by military insiders about crash retrievals and ongoing contact. Mitchell was not a fringe character. He held a doctorate from MIT. He was a Navy test pilot. He walked on the moon. His credibility is unimpeachable. And he spent the last decades of his life insisting that the public was being lied to about what exists beyond Earth and on the moon itself. Then there are the missing records. In 2006, NASA announced that the original telemetry tapes from Apollo 11 had been lost. Not archived poorly. Lost. The most significant recordings in human history, the data from the first moon landing, somehow misplaced. NASA claimed the tapes were probably recorded over to save money during a data storage shortage in the 1980s. The explanation is absurd. You do not accidentally erase Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon to save $20 on magnetic tape. Something on those recordings was deemed too sensitive to preserve in accessible archives. The Apollo 11 missing minutes are another mystery. There is a gap in the official transcripts during the landing sequence. Radio communications ceased for over 2 minutes. Ham radio operators, who were monitoring the mission on independent receivers, reported hearing the astronauts describe seeing other craft, structures near the crater where they landed. These reports were dismissed as hoaxes for decades, but in 2014, a former NASA contractor came forward, claiming he had seen the actual transcripts of the missing conversation. According to him, Armstrong reported seeing objects lined up on the crater rim, watching them land. Apollo 20 is perhaps the strangest piece of the puzzle. Officially, the Apollo program ended with Apollo 17. Missions 18, 19, and 20 were cancelled due to budget cuts. But rumors have persisted for decades about a classified mission. Apollo 20, launched in 1976 as a joint American-Soviet operation. The mission supposedly investigated a large object on the moon's far side near the Delport Isaac crater, something that appeared artificial in previous orbital photographs. Videos surfaced online in 2007, allegedly showing the interior of this object, including what looked like a mummified humanoid pilot in a control chair. NASA denounced the videos as hoaxes, but William Rutledge, claiming to be the Apollo 20 commander, gave detailed interviews describing the mission before disappearing from public view. His technical knowledge of spacecraft systems and lunar geography was suspiciously accurate for a hoaxer, and the videos, analyzed by imaging experts, show no obvious signs of digital manipulation. They were either elaborately produced practical effects, or they were real footage from inside an alien spacecraft on the moon. The Soviet Union had its own strange relationship with the moon. They launched over 20 unmanned missions between 1959 and 1976. 11 of them failed. Not failed as in did not complete all objectives. Failed as in lost contact, crashed, or disappeared entirely. The failure rate is far higher than would be expected from technical difficulties alone. Some missions succeeded in reaching the moon but then went silent upon arriving. Luna 15 crashed while Apollo 11 was on the surface, almost as if something deliberately destroyed it. Soviet cosmonauts reported seeing anomalous objects during Earth orbital missions. Some sightings were documented in mission logs later declassified. But unlike American astronauts, Soviet personnel faced severe consequences for speaking publicly about such things. The culture of secrecy was absolute. Whatever they found or saw regarding the moon remains locked in Russian military archives to this day. China's recent lunar missions have been unusually secretive. The Chang'e program has successfully landed multiple probes on both the near and far sides of the moon. Official releases show expected scientific data, but leaked internal communications suggest the Chinese have found structures, materials, and possibly technology that does not match known geological processes. In 2019, Chang 4 landed in the von Karman crater on the far side. Shortly after landing, team communications referenced discovering unusual materials with geometric properties. Those references were quickly scrubbed from internal reports, and subsequent press releases contained no mention of anything anomalous. India's space program reported similar oddities. The Chandrayaan missions detected signatures in the lunar regolith consistent with industrial residue, elements that require processing at temperatures and pressures not naturally occurring on the Moon. These findings were published in obscure scientific journals, but never promoted or explained. The data exists. The implications are ignored. Private space companies have suddenly become very interested in the Moon. SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others are developing lunar lander systems and promising commercial missions. Elon Musk has stated publicly that returning to the Moon is essential before going to Mars. Why? Mars is the stated goal, the ultimate objective for colonization. The Moon is just a stepping stone, according to official plans, unless the Moon is the actual destination, and Mars is the cover story. If private corporations have been briefed on what exists beneath the lunar surface, the sudden rush to develop independent access makes perfect sense. NASA's Artemis program promises to return humans to the Moon by the mid-2020s. The stated goal is establishing a permanent base, mining ice deposits for fuel and life support, and using the Moon as a staging point for Mars missions. But Artemis has objectives that are not publicly advertised. The landing sites selected are not near the Apollo sites. They are near areas where orbital imaging has detected anomalies, structures, openings, places where something might exist beneath the surface. There are international agreements about lunar exploration, treaties preventing military use of the Moon and claiming that it belongs to all humanity. But in 2020, the United States withdrew from some provisions of the Outer Space Treaty and began asserting rights to lunar resources. Russia and China have responded by accelerating their own programs. We are witnessing the beginning of a race, not to explore the Moon, but to reach something specific on or in the Moon before rivals get there first. Whatever NASA found during Apollo, whatever made them stop going for 50 years, has not disappeared. It is still there. And now multiple nations and private corporations are mobilizing to go back, not cautiously with single missions, but with full-scale infrastructure, permanent bases, and heavy equipment. You do not build that kind of capability just to study rocks. You build it because you are planning to excavate, to enter, to access something that requires significant resources and personnel on site. The question is whether we will be ready for what we find, or more accurately, whether what we find will be ready for us. Because if the Moon's inhabitants, dormant or active, mechanical or biological, do not want us there, 50 years of absence might have been mercy, not coincidence, and our return might be interpreted not as exploration, but as invasion. Let us be honest. Everything presented so far sounds insane to mainstream science. Hollow moons, ancient astronauts, classified government conspiracies. The entire hypothesis violates the principle of parsimony, Occam's razor, which states that the simplest explanation is usually correct. And the simplest explanation for the Moon is that it formed naturally through well-understood processes, no aliens required. So let us examine the orthodox position fairly, because dismissing scientific consensus without addressing its strongest arguments would be intellectually dishonest. The giant impact hypothesis is the prevailing theory for lunar formation. Around 4.5 billion years ago, a Mars-sized protoplanet called Theia collided with Earth. The impact vaporized both Theia's outer layers and a significant portion of Earth's mantle, ejecting massive amounts of debris into orbit. This debris coalesced over time, forming the Moon. Computer simulations of this event produce results that match many observed features. The Moon's composition is similar to Earth's mantle because that is what it formed from. The lack of a large iron core makes sense because the collision primarily involved rocky outer layers, not the iron cores of either body. This theory explains why Earth and the Moon have similar oxygen isotope ratios, essentially identical chemical fingerprints, suggesting they formed from the same material. It explains the moon's orbital characteristics, why it orbits in roughly the same plane as Earth's equator, and why its orbit was initially much closer before tidal forces gradually pushed it outward. The math works, the physics works. Thousands of peer-reviewed papers support this model. To dismiss it requires providing an alternative explanation that accounts for all the same data, while also explaining anomalies the giant impact hypothesis struggles with. And there are struggles. The impact should have left the moon spinning rapidly, yet it is tidally locked. The simulations have difficulty producing the moon's current mass and orbital parameters without extremely specific collision angles and velocities, a level of precision that seems suspiciously convenient. The moon's far side has a thicker crust than the near side, a feature not predicted by impact models and still not adequately explained. But these are refinements to the theory, not refutations. Science acknowledges these problems and continues investigating. The seismic data showing the moon ringing like a bell has an orthodox explanation. The moon's interior is cold and rigid compared to Earth. It has no liquid layers to dampen seismic waves. When impacted, vibrations travel through solid rock and reflect off internal boundaries, creating prolonged reverberations. Earth's molten outer core and plastic mantle absorb seismic energy quickly. The moon's solid structure does not. Therefore, longer ringing does not necessarily mean hollow, just structurally different from Earth. This explanation is taught in planetary geology courses worldwide and is supported by seismic data from other bodies in the solar system. The low density of the moon is explained by its formation from mantle material rather than core material. Earth's mantle has a density around 3.3 grams per cubic centimeter, almost exactly matching the moon's overall density. If the moon formed from Earth's mantle after the iron core was already differentiated, the density makes perfect sense. There is no missing mass. The moon simply never had a large iron core to begin with. Titanium concentrations in Lunar Maria are high, but not inexplicable. Mare basalts formed from partial melting of the lunar mantle, and titanium preferentially concentrates in certain types of basaltic magma. The Maria on the near side formed because that hemisphere has a thinner crust, allowing magma to reach the surface more easily. The thinner crust itself resulted from tidal heating during the moon's early history when it was much closer to Earth. None of this requires artificial construction. The uranium-236 and neptunium-237 that supposedly should not exist naturally can form through cosmic ray spallation. High-energy particles striking uranium-bearing minerals can transmute atoms into other isotopes over billions of years. The quantities detected are trace amounts, consistent with natural processes operating over geological timescales. Claiming these elements prove nuclear technology on the moon is like finding carbon-14 and concluding ancient humans had particle accelerators. The structures photographed during Apollo missions have prosaic explanations according to NASA. The shard is a photographic artifact, possibly a cosmic ray strike on the film creating a bright streak. The castle is a boulder on a hill, appearing to float due to perspective and lighting conditions. The bridge is a natural rock formation, rare but not impossible. Pareidolia, the tendency to see patterns and structures in random data, explains why people interpret lunar surface features as artificial. We see faces in clouds, buildings in mountains, and cities on Mars. Our brains are wired to detect patterns, sometimes seeing them where none exist. The lava tubes are exactly what they appear to be, volcanic formations created when the surface of a lava flow solidifies while molten rock continues flowing beneath. When the lava drains, hollow tubes remain. Earth has similar formations, though smaller due to our higher gravity. The moon's lower gravity allows larger, more stable tubes to form without collapsing. Nothing about them suggests artificial construction. Scientific consensus is not arrived at casually. Thousands of researchers across dozens of countries have examined lunar data for over 50 years. If obvious evidence of artificial structures existed, someone would have definitively proven it by now. The absence of such proof, despite intense scrutiny, suggests the evidence is not as clear as alternative theorists claim. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Blurry photographs and ambiguous seismic data do not meet that standard. And yet, science has been wrong before. Continental drift was ridiculed for decades before becoming accepted fact. Meteorites were dismissed as superstition until specimens were chemically analyzed. The possibility of planets around other stars was considered unlikely until thousands were discovered. Scientific consensus protects against accepting false ideas prematurely, but it also resists paradigm shifts even when evidence accumulates. The question is not whether mainstream science has explanations for lunar anomalies. It does. The question is whether those explanations fully account for all the data, or whether they are frameworks stretched to accommodate uncomfortable observations that hint at something more profound. Science demands skepticism of extraordinary claims, but it also demands openness to evidence that challenges existing models. The moon presents both, forcing us to balance healthy skepticism with intellectual honesty about what remains unexplained. So perhaps the truth lies somewhere between. Not a completely artificial construct, but not entirely natural either. A natural moon that was modified, hollowed out partially, equipped with technology, and repurposed as an ark. That would explain why it shows both natural geological features and impossible anomalies. It would satisfy both scientific data and alternative theories. A compromise position that neither side wants to accept because it requires admitting both are partially wrong. Something changed in 2019. NASA's seismic monitoring equipment, placed on the moon decades ago and still transmitting data, detected an anomaly. Moonquakes had been observed since the Apollo era, usually small tremors caused by tidal stresses from Earth's gravity or thermal expansion as the lunar surface heats and cools. But starting in 2019, the frequency increased. Not dramatically, not enough to make headlines, just enough that researchers noticed the pattern shift. By 2021, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter detected fresh fractures in areas that had been geologically stable for millions of years. Cracks appearing in the lunar crust, some of them extending for kilometers, showing up in high-resolution imagery where only smooth regolith existed before. The official explanation was thermal stress cycles, perfectly reasonable. Except these fractures appeared in locations where thermal modeling predicted they should not form. They appeared in patterns, radiating from specific points like spokes on a wheel. Then there are the transient lunar phenomena. These are brief flashes of light on the moon's surface, visible from Earth with telescopes. They have been documented for centuries, usually dismissed as meteor impacts or observer error. But the frequency has increased measurably over the past decade. Amateur astronomers worldwide report seeing these flashes weekly now, whereas historical records show them occurring only a few times per year. Something on the moon is producing light, intermittently, increasingly often. In 2022, a radio telescope array in Australia detected a signal originating from the moon's far side. The signal lasted 18 seconds, repeated once, then ceased. The frequency was not natural. It was narrowband, precisely tuned, the kind of signal only produced by technology. NASA and other agencies were notified. The response was silence. No official acknowledgement. No follow-up observations announced publicly. Just bureaucratic black hole where investigation should have occurred. When pressed, agencies stated the signal was likely interference from a satellite. Except no satellite was transmitting on that frequency in that direction at that time. Chinese researchers, analyzing data from their Chang'e missions, reported detecting magnetic field fluctuations near specific craters on the far side. These fluctuations occurred in pulses, regular intervals suggesting an artificial source. The data was published in a Chinese scientific journal, then quickly retracted without explanation. The researchers involved stopped responding to international inquiries. Whatever they detected was significant enough to classify immediately. If the moon is an ancient ark, dormant for millennia, what would trigger reactivation? The most obvious answer is detection of intelligent activity nearby. Our space programs would qualify. Rockets approaching, landers touching down, equipment operating on the surface. If automated systems were designed to monitor for technological civilizations, we have been setting off alarms for over 60 years. Consider the progression. Sputnik launched in 1957. Within 12 years, we landed humans on the moon. Our technological development accelerated exponentially in the 20th century. Radio broadcasts, nuclear detonations, satellite networks, all producing electromagnetic signatures detectable from space. If something on the moon has been asleep, our activity would be the alarm clock. Ancient prophecies describe a time when the moon awakens. Hopi traditions speak of the blue star Kachina, a celestial body that signals the end of one world and the beginning of another. Descriptions vary, but some interpretations suggest this is not a comet or distant star, but the moon itself changing, revealing its true nature. The prophecy states that when the blue star appears in the sky, the fifth world will emerge. We are supposedly living in the fourth world now, approaching transition. Hindu texts describe the end of the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, when divine beings return from their celestial abodes. The return is preceded by signs in the heavens, including changes to the moon. Islamic eschatology mentions the moon splitting, a sign of the end times. Revelation in the Christian Bible describes the moon turning to blood. Across cultures and religions, lunar transformation appears as a harbinger of massive change. What if these are not metaphors? What if ancient humans witnessed the moon activate partially, perhaps during its arrival or during a previous cycle, and recorded what they saw in the language available to them? A dormant structure coming online would produce light, possibly red or blue depending on what systems were powering up. Sections opening, revealing interior illumination. To ancient observers, this would look like the moon splitting, changing color, or transforming fundamentally. The question of what activation means depends on the moon's purpose. If it is an arc, reactivation might mean preparing for departure. Systems coming online, propulsion warming up, course corrections beginning, the gradual recession from Earth would accelerate. Within our lifetimes, the moon could leave orbit entirely, heading back into deep space or toward another destination. Earth would lose its stabilizing influence. Our axial tilt would begin wandering. Climate would destabilize. Ocean tides would change unpredictably. The consequences would be catastrophic for human civilization. Alternatively, activation might mean the inhabitants are waking up, suspended animation systems reversing. Biological entities or artificial intelligences that have been dormant for millions of years returning to consciousness. They would assess the situation, scan the planet below, detect technological civilization, and then decide whether humanity has developed sufficiently to make contact or whether we still pose a threat requiring containment. There is a third possibility. The moon was not just an ark for refugees, it was a weapon, a doomsday device positioned in orbit to ensure that if Earth's civilization ever reached a certain threshold of development without meeting specific criteria, it could be neutralized. Ancient texts describe divine judgment raining from the sky, celestial fire destroying wicked cities. We interpret these as primitive descriptions of natural disasters. But what if they were accurate accounts of orbital bombardment, the moon deploying kinetic weapons or directed energy against surface targets? If the moon is activating, we would see exactly what we are seeing: increased seismic activity as internal systems power up after eons of dormancy, energy discharges creating visible flashes, radio signals as communication arrays come online, structural stress as mechanical components begin moving, preparing for whatever the moon's programming dictates must happen next. NASA knows something. The timing of Artemis, the urgency of returning humans to the moon despite 50 years of absence, the selection of landing sites near anomalous features, all suggest response to detected changes. Space agencies worldwide are coordinating in ways they never have before. Information sharing has increased. Joint missions are being fast-tracked. This is not normal scientific collaboration. This is preparation. We are being positioned to respond to something. Whether that something is opportunity or threat remains unclear. If the moon opens, if doors unsealed for millions of years suddenly grant access to interior chambers, humanity will attempt entry. We will explore. We will document. We will claim whatever we find. And we will do this without knowing if the inhabitants, dormant or otherwise, consent to our presence. The activation question is not if, but when. Systems that have waited this long are running on timescales we barely comprehend. Decades mean nothing to machinery designed to function for millions of years. The signals we are detecting now might be early diagnostic checks, systems testing functionality before full activation, or they might be the final stages, the last preparations before something monumental occurs. Either way, the moon is waking up, and we are standing directly beneath it, oblivious to what that means, unprepared for the moment when the sky opens and everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe changes forever. Our moon is not alone in its strangeness. Once you start looking at other moons in our solar system with the same critical eye, patterns emerge that are deeply unsettling. Mars has two moons, Phobos and Deimos. Both are oddly shaped, looking more like captured asteroids than natural satellites, except Phobos has a density of only 1.86 grams per cubic centimeter. That is lighter than solid rock. Much lighter. Soviet scientist Iosif Shklovsky calculated in 1959 that Phobos must be hollow to explain its orbital decay rate and low density. He was not joking. He published his findings in respected scientific journals. A hollow moon orbiting Mars. Phobos also has a mysterious monolith, a rectangular boulder standing upright on the surface, casting a long shadow in images taken by Mars orbiters. It is estimated to be 90 meters tall, far larger than anything nearby, and sits isolated on flat terrain. Buzz Aldrin mentioned this monolith specifically, stating that when people find out what it is, they will say who put that there, not what natural process created it, who put it there. The phrasing reveals his assumption. Intelligence placed it. Then there is Iapetus, Saturn's third largest moon. Iapetus has a feature so bizarre that NASA scientists openly struggle to explain it. An equatorial ridge running almost exactly along the moon's equator, stretching 1,300 kilometers long and 20 kilometers high. It looks like a seam, like two hemispheres were welded together. Natural processes do not create perfectly equatorial mountain ranges. Tectonic activity is random. Volcanic formations follow internal heat sources. But this ridge is geometrically precise, as if Iapetus was manufactured in two pieces and assembled. Iapetus also has extreme color variation. One hemisphere is bright, the other dark. The contrast so sharp that early astronomers thought they were seeing two different objects. The dark material covers exactly one hemisphere, not scattered randomly. It appears applied, like a coating. Arthur C. Clarke famously used Iapetus as inspiration for the alien monolith in 2001, A Space Odyssey, because even in the 1960s, scientists recognized how artificial it looked. Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, has an ice shell covering a subsurface ocean. The ice shows massive cracks and fractures, but very few impact craters. This means the surface is young, constantly resurfacing. Something beneath is generating heat, melting and refreezing the ice. The standard explanation is tidal heating from Jupiter's gravity. Plausible. But the crack patterns are too organized, too geometric. Some form hexagons. Others create parallel lines, stretching for hundreds of kilometers. And then there are the plumes, geysers of water erupting from the surface, sometimes shooting hundreds of kilometers into space. What kind of internal pressure creates that? Or is something venting deliberately, releasing waste or excess heat from subsurface operations? Enceladus, one of Saturn's moons, has similar geysers. Cassini spacecraft flew through these plumes and detected organic molecules, salts and silica particles, all suggesting a habitable ocean beneath the ice. But Enceladus is tiny, only 500 kilometers in diameter. It should be geologically dead, frozen solid. Yet it is spraying water into space with enough force to create one of Saturn's rings. Where is the energy coming from? Natural radioactive decay cannot account for the observed activity. Something else is generating power inside Enceladus. Now step back and look at the pattern. Multiple moons across the solar system showing anomalies, hollow interiors, geometric surface features, unexplained energy sources, active venting. It starts looking less like coincidence and more like infrastructure. What if our solar system is not a random collection of natural bodies, but an engineered environment, a preserve, a zoo, a laboratory? This connects directly to the Fermi paradox. Enrico Fermi asked the most important question in astrobiology. If intelligent life is common in the universe, where is everybody? We should see evidence everywhere. Radio signals, megastructures, von Neumann probes spreading across the galaxy. But we see nothing. The universe appears empty. Why? One answer is the zoo hypothesis. Advanced civilizations exist but deliberately avoid contact with developing species like us. They observe from a distance, ensuring we develop naturally without interference. This requires infrastructure, observation posts, communication relays, bases positioned where they can monitor without being detected. Hollowed-out moons orbiting inhabited planets would be perfect for this purpose. Hidden in plain sight, dismissed as natural objects by the primitive civilizations below. If Earth is a preserve, a protected zone where humanity is allowed to develop without outside interference, then the Moon is the observation station. Other moons in the solar system serve supporting roles: refueling depots, communication hubs, backup facilities. The solar system itself is the infrastructure, and we are the exhibit, watched by intelligences that have been here far longer than we have. This also explains why we do not see evidence of alien civilizations. We are looking in the wrong places. We scan distant stars for radio signals, assuming advanced civilizations advertise their presence. But what if the opposite is true? What if truly advanced civilizations prioritize stealth, blending into the natural environment so completely that younger species never realize they are surrounded by artificial structures? We could be living inside a Dyson swarm and not know it because the collectors look like asteroids. We could be orbiting artificial satellites and not know it because they look like moons. The Great Filter might not be ahead of us. It might be around us. An invisible barrier maintained by older civilizations ensuring younger ones do not expand beyond their solar systems until they reach specific developmental thresholds. We are quarantined. The solar system is our playpen. And when we finally develop the capability to detect the infrastructure around us, when we finally recognize the Moon and other bodies for what they really are, that is when contact occurs. That is when the filter lifts, and we are either welcomed into the galactic community or eliminated as a threat. Or maybe the simulation hypothesis is correct. None of this is physically real. We are existing inside a computational substrate designed to study civilizational development. The Moon is a rendered object, assigned properties that create interesting dynamics for the simulation. The anomalies are not construction flaws, they are hints. Clues left deliberately for us to find, breadcrumbs leading toward the realization that our reality is not base reality, that someone or something is running this experiment and observing the results. Every answer leads to more questions. Every discovery reveals how little we actually understand. The Moon is not just a mystery, it is a gateway, and once we step through, once we truly comprehend what it is and what its existence means, everything changes. Our history, our future, our place in the cosmos. All of it rewritten in an instant when we finally see what has been hanging in our sky, watching us, waiting for us to wake up and recognize it for billions of years. So here we are, 2 hours into this journey, and if you have made it this far, you are part of a very small group. Most people cannot handle information that fundamentally challenges their understanding of reality. They close the tab. They dismiss it as fantasy. They return to comfortable explanations that require no adjustment to their worldview. But you stayed. That means something. It means you are willing to question. Willing to consider possibilities that make authorities uncomfortable. Willing to look at the Moon and ask, what if? Let us recap the 5 most compelling pieces of evidence that mainstream science cannot adequately explain. First, the seismic data. The Moon rang like a bell for over 3 hours after deliberate impacts. That behavior is consistent with a hollow or partially hollow structure, not a solid planetary body. Second, the density problem. The Moon is far too light for its size, missing the massive iron core that should exist if it formed naturally alongside Earth. Third, the impossible orbital mechanics. The Moon's circular orbit, perfect tidal locking, and exact size for total solar eclipses represent mathematical probabilities so unlikely they strain credibility as coincidence. Fourth, the processed materials on the surface. Titanium concentrations, radioactive isotopes that only form through nuclear reactions, and metallic particles that should not exist in pristine condition after billions of years. Fifth, the structures photographed by multiple missions from multiple countries, geometric features, massive underground voids, and surface anomalies that look constructed rather than geological. Any one of these could be explained away individually. Together, they form a pattern, and patterns indicate design. What this means for humanity is profound and unsettling. If the moon is artificial, then our entire understanding of human history is incomplete at best, deliberately falsified at worst. We are not the first advanced civilization on Earth or in this solar system. We are inheritors of a legacy we have forgotten. The myths and legends we dismissed as primitive superstition might be fragmented memories of actual events. The gods who descended from the sky might have been real beings operating from a base we see every night but do not recognize. It means we are being watched, right now. Systems on or in the moon are monitoring our development, recording our progress, perhaps reporting to intelligences elsewhere. Every rocket we launch, every satellite we deploy, every technological threshold we cross is noted and evaluated. We are either being protected until we reach maturity, or contained until we can be safely integrated into a larger cosmic community, or observed as subjects in an experiment whose parameters we cannot begin to understand. It means the space programs are not what they claim to be. The sudden rush back to the moon by every major power is not about science or resources. It is about access. Something has changed. Either the moon is activating and agencies are scrambling to understand what is happening, or intelligence has been received indicating that access will soon be granted or denied permanently. We are in a race against time or against each other, and the public is not being told why. It means you need to start paying attention. Watch what happens over the next few years. Watch which countries establish permanent lunar bases and where they place them. Watch for announcements that seem innocuous but reveal coordinates near anomalous features. Watch for sudden changes in official narratives about what the moon is and how it formed. The disclosure might not come as a press conference admitting extraterrestrial artifacts. It might come as gradual normalization of ideas currently dismissed as conspiracy theories, a slow process of preparing the public for revelations that would cause panic if delivered abruptly. Demand transparency from space agencies. File freedom of information requests for lunar imaging data. Support independent researchers who are investigating these anomalies without institutional funding or approval. The more pressure the public applies, the harder it becomes to maintain secrecy. Truth wants to emerge. It requires people willing to look for it and demand it. But also prepare yourself philosophically. If disclosure comes, if the moon reveals itself as artificial, your entire framework for understanding existence will need rebuilding. You will need to reconcile the idea that humanity is not the pinnacle of cosmic development, but perhaps a junior species in a much larger community. That Earth might not be our original home, that we might be descendants of refugees or experiments, or carefully managed subjects in someone else's project. These are not comfortable thoughts. They require humility and flexibility that most people lack. The moon has been hanging in our sky for as long as humans have looked upward. It has shaped our cultures, our calendars, our mythologies, and our tides. We have written poetry about it, worshipped it as a deity, and eventually landed on its surface. But we have never truly seen it. Not really. We have looked at it through the lens of assumptions and official narratives that trained us what to see and what to ignore. It is time to look again. Not with telescopes designed to confirm what we already believe, but with open minds willing to accept what the evidence actually shows. The moon is not just a rock, it never was. And the moment you accept that, everything changes. So go outside tonight, look up, see that pale disk hanging in the darkness, and ask yourself, who is really watching whom? Are we observing the moon, or has the moon been observing us this entire time, waiting patiently for the day we finally understand what we are looking at? The answer is up there, 384,000 kilometers away, waiting for someone brave enough to reach it and demand the truth. And if you go back and watch from the beginning now, you will notice something we mentioned in the first 5 minutes that suddenly makes terrifying sense. Tonight, when you look up at the moon, remember this. It might be looking back,